Hello, everybody. Today, we are going to talk about what is Spring. If you've ever asked that question, guess what? You are in the right place. Not only are we going to talk about what is Spring, we're going to talk about why you would want to use Spring. We're going to talk about the various projects that are in the Spring ecosystem. You're like, projects? Yes, there's more than one. And we're going to talk about how some of these fit into handling your business problem. Then we're going to talk about the who uses Spring out there. We're going to kind of cover that. Now, I feel kind of safe harbory here. I want us to have like, there it is. Yes, we have our legal portion of our presentation. Enjoy the beauty, the wonder of this wonderful writing. Our attorneys' hearts are thumping because you're reading it. Now, Bob, tell them about yourself.
I'm Bob McNees. I'm an engineering manager on the Spring team at VMware. I get to help out the engineers that work on Project Reactor, Spring Cloud Tasks, Spring Batch, the UI, and a few other areas. So, Glenn?
Okay, folks, my name is Glenn. I am a VMware engineer. I work on Spring projects. I work on Spring Cloud Tasks, Spring Cloud Data Flow, and when Mood says, okay, Glenn, you asked, come on over, I work on Spring Batch, and in case of emergency, you will actually see Oleg walk out with this little hammer and break glass that come out and actually help out on Spring Cloud Stream from time to time. When I am not doing that, I'm also the board of directors of Atlanta Java Users Group. I really like Java. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also on the board of directors of DevNexus. So, folks, I just love what I do. And, I'm freshly minted Java champion as of, like, yesterday, I think. So, all right. Now, what's even more important than that? Bob, they've been waiting. What is Spring?
That's the big question, and we'll unpack that more as we go. But for right now, let's just say it's a framework or a set of projects designed to take a lot of different technologies, combine them in a way that allows you to integrate them and write better software. So why would somebody use Spring?
Well, basically, think about it this way. Spring streamlines the development process of your applications. It makes it quicker, easier, and safer to develop applications. And those sentences may mean, they're kind of generic, but what we're going to do to bring it in sharper focus, we're going to ask some questions that, my app needs to do this, this, and this, and we're going to discuss which Spring projects help us out with that. Now, Bob, who uses Spring?
Yeah, a lot of people. So Spring is the most popular Java enterprise framework in the world. It's very likely everybody in this room has already used a Spring app, whether you know it or not. And so not only is it large, but it's also growing. Spring Boot has seen download growth grow by 50% or more in the past 5 years. So,
sweet.
Yeah. So how do we get started?
Oh, now that is a good question. I already love Spring, and a lot of people have fun coding Spring, but I wanted to make it even more fun. So to make it a little bit more fun, I was like, Bob, what should we do? But a friend of mine named Rondo Johnson, who's also a great developer, said, Glenn, Legos. So the first thing is when you build up a Lego structure, you always have like this base plate, this foundation from which you build your structure. In Spring, we have something very similar. It's called the Spring Framework. The Spring Framework gives us a basic set of tools that allows us to just speed up developing our application. Things like inversion of control, dependency injection. How do we handle transactions? It simplifies that. Events. How do we handle events? This simplifies testing, gives us a basic suite of tools for handling relational databases, and so much more. Now, when we talk about that, and what's awesome about it is that Spring has just crossed 20 years. Yes, it's 20 years old. You're like, man, this is an old architecture. Actually, no. Spring is growing faster now than it's ever done before. And you're going to see some of that, and you're going to be like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. But we're going to try to condense that for you. But Bob, all that stuff, it's really cool. It makes things faster. But there's some other things that happens out there. It's like when I'm pulling in all these dependencies, all these things have different version numbers. Is there an easier way to handle that? There's some, configuration. Is there a way to auto-configure some of that? And, finding the good defaults. How do you even start that? Is there something you can help me out with?
There is. So 10 years ago, Spring Boot was introduced to be the entry point into the Spring portfolio. So Spring Boot handles the dependencies for you, so it brings in common sets of technologies so that you can get to work faster. So by using starters, it brings in the components that you need and the version numbers, so it'll manage all of that for you. In addition to helping you with your dependencies, it'll also provide the ability to balance speed and control. So it provides sensible defaults so that you can get started immediately, but also at any point if you wanted to override those defaults and jump in and take full control, there's no problem to do that. It's really easy to do. So Boot gets us started quickly. What are some of these technologies we can pull in?
So, do you remember I said that Spring is growing faster every year, and we're just doing so much more in the project? The Spring team is just fantastic, and you know what's better? The community that supports the Spring team is marvelous. But, so, what do we want to focus on? Well, we can see that there's a number of Spring projects that are out there, and that, that's purposely a tiny font. It's because I said, let's put all the Spring projects that are out there, but Glenn, where do we even start? So Bob, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, when it's time to add Spring data, you're going to add data, you add Spring data. When you add batch, you add Spring batch. When it's time for you to add cloud, you need to add cloud. Okay. I think I overwhelmed myself, Bob. I think I have a headache.
Yeah,
Can you help me out?
That's a lot, Glenn. How about we just start with maybe some business cases, and let's just go case by case here.
Please, thank you.
All right, simplest thing, we have two apps. They need to talk to each other in some way. How do we help?
Okay, I'm going to channel my inner Nate Shuda and say, it depends. I know, the classic question, right? The classic answer. It depends. So, there's many ways we can use messaging frameworks, or we could just use a regular RESTful API. Now, to do that, we want to have like what we call an MVC, a model view architecture to support us so that we can focus on the business problem and have the infrastructure to support it. I don't have to add anything because the Spring framework out of this foundation offers that. But we also need to have something like a Tomcat server, right? So that we can take and route the messages that are coming in, the requests that are coming in, and route them to what we call the controllers. We're actually going to demonstrate this for you in a little bit to be able to handle that wonderful business logic that you write or your developers write. So how can we do that? Spring actually has these things called starters. And starters basically say, look, what we're going to do is we're going to provide you a series of auto configurations that will set up your app to provide you the foundations that you need. So if I add the starter named Spring Web, it will automatically start a Tomcat server for me. And you're like, well, Glenn, we don't use Tomcat, we use Jetty. That's fine. You can add Jetty right. You can add the Jetty. I think it's just add the Jetty dependency in Ready to Rock. The wonderful thing about Spring is that it's this. When you are using Spring Boot, you can use the auto configuration, or what you can do is just say, hey, I want to have my own configuration. And at that time, Spring Boot just says, I'll get out of the way and respect your request. So that's the wonderful part. We're going to kind of show that a little bit to you later. But Bob, what else you got? This is a lot of fun. I like building stuff.
Yeah, let's add another brick. So I think applications can't do much unless they keep track of some data. So how does Spring help me persist data?
In that case, we have a project called Spring Data. The concept behind Spring Data is this. It says, look, what if we could give you a consistent and familiar way to give you a Spring programming model for data access? What this means is I can query data or add mutations, and no matter what database type I have, they never really change. So if we'll talk a little bit about it in a second. But the wonderful thing is not only does it give me that consistent interface no matter what type of database I'm using, it allows me to it simplifies the structure that I need to get those special features that each database offers, no matter what type of database. So whether you are using JPA, document database, key value store, Cassandra, relational database, you still have those easy methods that work no matter which one you have. But if you need that special traits that Mongo offers, Spring simplifies your access for you, so saving you a lot of time. Bob, can I demo this, please?
Not yet. Yeah, here's security's kind of a big deal these days.
Oh, yeah.
So how does Spring help us out here?
Okay, well, we have a project called Spring Security, and the Spring Security team is a great bunch of folks, and basically what they do through Spring Security, it is basically this. It's a de facto standard for securing your Spring-based applications. It gives you that authorization and authentication services right out of the box. Then it also provides those things that help protect your apps against clickjacking and session fixation. So when it's time for you to secure your Spring application, think about Spring Security. You're like, well, Glenn, what about authorization service? So, do you have anything for like that for OAuth? And the answer is absolutely. We have something called Spring Authorization Server. The community says, Spring, can you help us out with that? And the Spring security team says, well, yeah, we can. And we now have provided that authorization service for us, again, called the Spring Authorization Service. So Bob, I need a little help here. I want to get started, but can we show folks what that looks like before we get started?
Yeah, so a great way to get started is on this website. So if Spring Boot is the entry point into the Spring portfolio, this is the website that is the entry point to Spring Boot. So this is Spring Initializer, found at start.spring.io, told one of the best places on the internet. And this is going to take a boot-centric view of the world. And so what you're going to see is your ability to start a project quickly. And on the right there, we've talked a little bit about starters and boot dependency management and how Boot can help us with that. And so this is how that happens. So on the right, each one of those represents starters. And when we dive in a little closer, we'll see that those starters don't actually have any version numbers associated to them. So they have starters that are going to be associated and keyed off of the boot version number, and then they're going to pull in the projects, the components, the version numbers that are needed to accomplish that task. So let's go even one level down and let's see what's inside of a starter. So just pulling one almost at random, Spring Boot Security Starter 3.1.1. All right, so we see what's in this. You can always see this in Maven Central. So if we look and we see what's inside, you'll see it pulls components from Spring Framework 6.0.10, Spring Security 6.1.1. It'll pull in others. And this is something that these starters do for you. So it manages the components and the version numbers that you pull in. And the great thing is that you don't need to know any of that. You don't need to know which versions are going to be compatible with other versions, and Spring Boot manages all of that for you. And so additionally, when it comes time to upgrade, the other great thing is you don't need to go through each individual project and upgrade. When it comes time to upgrade, you upgrade your boot version number. You'll get a new starter with a new set of dependencies, a new set of version numbers, and off you go.
Bob, can I write some code?
Yeah, I think it's about that time.
Sweet. Yes. So, where do I start?
Start.spring.io.
Oh, okay. I can do that. I can do that. All right. So we're going to do that. We're going to do to start. If I could type start.spring.io. There we go. All right. So I'm going to kind of maximize that so people can see a little better. All right. Okay. I can do Gradle. Groovy, Kotlin, what do you want to do here, Bob? Tell me. I'm lost.
So let's we'll keep Gradle, Groovy, language, Java. Let's use the latest milestone, 3.2, sure. And then the project metadata. You can fill in whatever you need to here, Glenn. We'll keep the packaging as jar. We'll keep Java 17. That's needed for the Spring Boot 3 line.
Okay.
And now let's go to the dependencies. So let's see the different starters. For our sample app, let's build maybe the most basic Hello World web application just to see how this gets going. So
okay, that's a lot here. How do I get it?
There's a lot of starters. So let's just type in web, see what comes up. And so there you go. So this will help us, but let's VMware explore this thing. So let's take a look at the build.gradle. You can see we have the boot version number there that we talked about, 3.2, and then the starters are going to be brought in the dependencies. Notice the lack of version number there. So it's all keyed on the boot version number. So, all right, let's show them all of the code that this generated.
I bet this is a code generation machine. Bob?
Yeah, maybe
there's not a lot there.
No. So that Spring Boot application is gonna be what we need to kind of get started with this. And so that's going to be all the code that's generated. So Glenn's going to bring this down. He's going to download this. It'll come into as a zip file to his local machine, and he'll load this up into his IDE of choice using IntelliJ today. So for our sample application, again, we'll just make a sample REST endpoint real quick just to show kind of some of the features of Spring Boot and how easy it is to get started quickly.
I made a mistake. I apologize. So this is the best part about all this is you get to see mistakes live. Okay, I did it spell. Or did I didn't downloads? Did I not put the right? Oh, I know what I did. There we go. There we go. There we go. See? Thank y'all, audience. You rock. Wait a minute. Hold on. Oh, so you know what we're going to do? We're going to go back to here. See, that's the reason why I have y'all here, because y'all are keeping me straight here. All right, so we're going to go back and we're going to zoom out. All right, so, okay. Let's go back. There we go. Thank you. S1 demo, golly, there we go. S1 demo, thank you. So Bob, you know I said we have 5 minutes to do this? Well, we might have a little less than 5 minutes to do this. There we go. All right, thank you, folks. You rock. There we go. Yeah, we'll go there, demo. Yay, look at that. There we go. Whoop, there we are. All right, so Bob, I messed that up. Let's keep going. That was the hardest part of the presentation, I think. All right, here we go. So we're going to let this, all right, there we go. All right, now, what do I do now?
So first thing, we'll add a new endpoint controller. So we'll add a new controller here, whatever you need it to be. And this will be our endpoint for us. So
Okay. I think, here we go. There. I've already pre-created it, Bob. Look at that.
Yeah.
There we go. Already
So
done. Let's keep going.
yeah, so we got the REST controller, and so we have that annotation, and so that's gonna tell Spring Boot that we want to register this as the controller, and then we have an endpoint there.
Yep.
So the hello endpoint will have annotated with the get mapping in the hello controller.
Sorry
there.
about that, folks. There we go. Oh my gosh. Okay, folks, it was having a problem. Yeah, there we go.
All
now
right.
we'll do hello controller. Now that was interesting. There we go. All right, there we go, folks. All right, now we're going to get it. That was interesting. I know. That's okay.
I think it's the keyboard.
It is the
It's
keyboard.
the
Yeah,
keyboard.
it's not me.
We got to get you a new machine.
Okay, string.
And so we'll annotate this with REST controller. And so here for our method, we'll just any endpoint here will return a string, take a string as a parameter, and we'll just return hello and then the name. And so to tell Spring that this is an endpoint that we need to hit, we have another annotation we can use at get mapping. And so in here we can specify the URL as well that we'll hit to test this out.
There we go.
And that's all we need. That's all we need to get started. We brought in the starters, just a simple controller class, and it should be good to go.
All right, so now we see that it actually did here. It started at port 8080. So we're going to go back to our browser here, and we're going to go and say localhost. Looks like I might have done this before, Bob. It doesn't look like it, but I certainly have practiced this. So we have hello Bob here. And then we can say Glenn, and we see that it's actually giving us something live. That's pretty cool. What else we got?
Yeah, so 8080, show me that in the code, Glenn.
Actually, that's one of those defaults it gives us.
Yeah, so we call that out. This is a pattern that Spring Boot's going to use. So 8080 is one of those sensible defaults, so it's something that Boot gives you to allow you to get started quickly. But that's something that you can override very fast anytime you want to. So Glenn's going to change the application.properties, override server.port, and now we'll be on 9020. And so we call this out because this is an important pattern that you'll see all throughout Spring Boot. It's how we balance the speed to get started quickly with the ability to give you full control.
Well, there we go. Bob, real quick, can I do an experiment? Not like the one I did before, but maybe something that works a little better. In this case, what I want to do is I want to see how long it took for our application to start. So if I do a Gradle build, and I'm going to just build it, the jar, right? So I'm going to build our project. And the thing that I want to be able to do with this project is to see how long did it takes to start, and I want to see how much memory it takes, right? So in this case, we have we've built it, so we can do the following. I'm actually going to cheat and go over here, and I'm going to do S1 demo here. There we go. And then what I'm going to do here is just say java-jar, and then I'm going to say build, and then say libs, and then S1 demo.jar. All right. Now the first thing I want to see is that I did not turn off the original. There we go. There we go, and now it starts. And we see that it takes 1.495 seconds. I'm going to have a bad memory. So folks, if you could, remember 1.495 seconds, okay? That's your job. You got another job that's coming up. And what we want to do is see that untuned, we see that this app took 423 meg. Let's see if we can make it a little faster to start and maybe use a little less memory. Now, the way we're going to do that is something we call native compilation. And the way that we handle the native compilation is Graal has introduced a project that allows us to natively compile our apps. And what we do to add and enable that is that we were just going to add in the plugin from Graal, in this case. And we add that plugin. And then from here, what we're going to do is say Gradle native compile. Now, what's going to happen is instead of running our app into JVM, we're going to be actually running it natively. But this takes a few minutes for it to do this magic. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our presentation. And can you ask me some questions, and we'll keep going down this line and see what we can find.
Sure. So let's keep building out our app. So let's say we get that dreaded 3 a.m. phone call. We need to know what's wrong in our application. How does Spring help me with that?
Okay, well, the first thing we want to do here is maybe take a couple of steps back. What if we were like to put some metrics or capture metrics such that we could see that problem happening maybe a week earlier? So what if we had our app where we could actually go in and control and say, look, we want to add something like observations and report these observations so that we can go to our favorite observation framework like Wavefront, Prometheus, Influx, Datadog, whatever, and have our apps report that so we can catch that a bit earlier. Spring said, wait a minute, wait, we can help you with that. So they teamed up with the Micrometer team, and basically Micrometer gives us one interface to be able to write our metrics, write our observations out to, and no matter what type of observation framework that you're using, it will record those out. The best part about having it here is that this basically enables all Spring projects you pull in to record this information. And you can enable these by just setting up the following. One is to add the Spring Boot actuator, and then you bring in the dependency for your favorite observation framework. And then you set the properties to say, I want to enable Spring to record this information for me so that we can capture it from the Spring framework point of view. But the wonderful part about Micrometer is now when I want to record these metrics from my application, I don't have to learn all these other various frameworks on how to record this information. What happens is that Spring, or Micrometer gives me one interface, so I have to learn only one interface to be able to record this level of information. Bob, I like this structure. What else can we do?
Okay, let's say it's still 3 a.m. We did not catch it in time.
Whoops.
Yep. So we identified the problem. It's just a property. So how do we just change a property and then we just go back to bed?
Well, sometimes changing a property and repaving means basically go through your apps and restart all your apps. It can be a very tedious process, right? So what if we could say that maybe we have our apps reach out to a configuration server to get these properties back, okay? And that way we have one person could go to something like a Vault or a GitHub, and they have versioning for their configurations, and they can go in and make the change there, and then the apps can take advantage of it. Spring offers something called the config client that is, again, as we can see, a starter. And basically what this does is enables our apps to go to a config server to get these properties, so we don't have to go in and do this manually and go through all the processes that are involved. But you say, where does the configuration server come in, right? Well, basically, you're going to have a Spring Boot app that uses the Spring config server starter. And when you pull in this config, this starter, then what this will do is create you a config server right out of the box. And then you can tell it, do you want Vault, do you want GitHub, or whatever else you're using as your back-end service for that. Now, what this means is now that if one person makes that one change, then we can go in and just restart the apps. And when they start up, they're going to look to that config server to get their properties, one change. Now, one thing I want to say is there's a little step extra. You say, well, man, I've still got to go through and repave all these things, right? Well, if you add in Spring Cloud Bus, it adds an extra feature for you. In this case, what it will do is that if you make a change in the config server, you make a property change, it will notify all the apps downstream that, hey, there's a new configuration, take advantage of it. Okay, Bob, can we add more to this structure?
Looks like we got a pretty good tower, so let's do what my kids do when we build a nice Lego tower and just knock it down.
Can we put those toys in a box? Because I used to step on them, and they hurt my feet a lot when I step on a Lego in the middle of the night.
Yeah, let's keep going, kind of case by case, and see where we end up. All right, so next, let's say our application or our enterprise has grown. We have a lot of different endpoints or a lot of different clients that are calling us now. We have to give different data subsets to a lot of different applications. Maybe this is especially important in mobile when we pay for the data that goes across the wire.
Yes.
So how's Spring help?
Well, in this case, we can think about it this way. Is what we can do is to maybe have like a query language. You can query the APIs, and we get exactly what we need. Believe it or not, there's a project out there called GraphQL that does that. And Spring team teamed up with the GraphQL for Java team, and we actually saw that in the presentation yesterday, where they teamed together to create Spring for GraphQL. And of course, it has a starter, and thus you can actually be able to add these GraphQL queries to your application simply by using Spring. All right.
Great. So let's say we want to put a messaging architecture in, something to maybe scale independently so we don't lose messages. Like, how can we do messaging in Spring?
Well, when you say that, I'm thinking things like Kafka, Rabbit, something like that. Well, we do have a series of projects that are out there that will enable us that access, so we can actually be able to give, similar to Spring data, that consistent, familiar Spring-based programming model for accessing messaging frameworks. And so we have projects that basically give you a ability to consume and produce messages, but what? Have that same look and feel no matter which one you use, but then also what? Give you that ease, that access to being able to reach each of those specialized values that each one of these particular messaging frameworks have. Well, so whether you're using Rabbit or what we call MQP, you can pull in the Spring for Rabbit. When it's time for Kafka, you can use Spring for Apache Kafka. So like if you're using Kafka streams, again, you have that special feature that allows you to simplify access to that. And introducing this year, we actually have Spring for Pulsar. So no matter what framework you're using or trying to consume or produce messages to, Spring can assist you with that. But then what if I'm writing microservices and I want my developers to focus just on the business logic? I want them to focus on the function. I want them to be able to test that function in isolation. But that function, I want to tie it into maybe from an inbound topic, and they want to tie the input to that function from an inbound topic, and they want to write the output from this function to an outbound topic. What if we could say they don't have to write any code? What if they were to bring in something called Spring Cloud Stream? If they bring in Spring Cloud Stream, what this allows developers to do is to focus on writing that business logic, that function, and then it basically auto wires that function into the inbound topic and the outbound topic for you. Thus, you focus on the business problem, and when it's time for you to deploy your application, you can configure how it ties in through properties, no code. That is a very valuable tool there for that. But the other feature is you say, what if I'm reading in from Kafka and I'm writing out to Pulsar? Does Spring Cloud Stream support that? The answer is yes. Okay?
Yeah, let's keep going. So our enterprise is growing again. We have a lot of different APIs now, but some of the stuff that everybody has to do and they call an API is kind of the same. Is there any way that Spring can help me make that easier?
So in this case, what we do have the opportunity to do is to think about it this way. I want to be able to configure how my requests are getting to my services. I need to be able to have circuit breakers, so if one of the services go down, I can manage that service, but also maybe give a good default feedback when that service is down back to the client. I also want to have security, but I also want to add observations so that I want to know how long it takes for that request to get from the client and then get their response back. Spring Cloud Gateway does this for us. It provides us those services, the circuit breakers, the observation, security, the ease of the ability to do that mapping. So when it's time for that, again, start with Spring Boot and add in the Spring Cloud Gateway starter, and then take a look and have some fun.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about these processes that run for a while, but that's not all there is in an enterprise. Sometimes you have to do stuff in the middle of the night, move data around, clean up a database, run a report. Mm-hmm. So how do we do that with Spring? So
I'm going to add one thing. We're going to do a lot of big data process, or not big data, but handle a lot of transactions, a lot of data, but we also may be doing some heavy-duty computations. That feels like I want to do something like with maybe something ephemeral, an app that starts, does something, terminates, right? But that feels like a batch job, right? But when you think about batch job, that is a bunch of boilerplate code that I have to write. And then I have to have things like restartability, I want to have retries. I wonder if there's a Spring project out there. Actually, there is. It's called Spring Batch. Spring Batch says, wait, don't be going in and writing all that boilerplate code. What I want you to do is this. We have a series of builders. These builders allow you to design a job. Then you have another builder that when you design that job, each job has a series of steps. Then we have builders to allow you to design that step. Then you say, I want to have read and write. I want to read, process, and write the data for each one of those various steps. But man, that's still a lot of writing for those readers and writers. What if I said we have builders for those too? And then what I can do is whether I'm reading from Mongo and writing out to a messaging framework, or I'm reading from a flat file to a relational database, I use builders to build those out. And then guess what you get out of the box? You say, what about the transactions? I got to write all that stuff? part of the configuration when you set up your builder. Restartability, you get that right out of the box. And then it gives you this ability to be able to store context so that when you restart your app, you can customize how your app is restarted. When I say restart, what I mean is you're processing 5 million records and that record 2 million, it fails. Do you want to reprocess all those first 2 million? No, you want to pick up where it left off. And in that case, Spring Batch offers that right out of the gate for you. Spring Batch works great in the cloud, but there's some other things that you need in order to run an ephemeral app in the cloud. You may want to record how your app behaves when it started and how it ended. You may only want to run one batch job at a time here, so you don't want somebody to accidentally start it again and then they collide. Spring Cloud Task offers those features for you. So when you're running a cloud, look at Spring Cloud Task. And then you say, well, we're running not 10 jobs or running 10 ephemeral apps. I'm running thousands. Then we have something called Spring Cloud Data Flow that allows you to orchestrate how you manage, launch, schedule, and check the condition of those apps as they're running within your infrastructure. And the best part is when it's time for you to be able to design your streams that we talked about with using Spring Cloud Stream, the orchestration of that actually comes through. You can orchestrate that through Spring Cloud Data Flow as well. Bob, what else you got?
Okay, how about serverless? Say we want to maybe break our architecture into something that's really small so we can decompose it, maybe scale to 0.
I do love functions. I love writing functions. Like we talked about, I love the aspect that I can actually go in, test them in isolation, just focus on the job. But wouldn't it be great if I could bring the Spring goodness into when I write my functions? And in that case, we have a project out there called Spring Cloud Function that gives you those features for like auto configuration, the good defaults, allows you the simple access to those other projects that Spring makes Spring great. And then we even saw in the keynote yesterday how Spring Cloud Function in the background with AWS simplifies the developers to be able to write those functions in a AWS instance. But sometimes people say, well, when I think Java and then I look at, that you have to warm up that JVM. And there's various strategies that you can do to have that quick start for that function. In that case, what if we were to natively compile our functions? What does that look like? So in that case, let's see what happened when we ran our natively compiled our app and see if maybe a natively compiled app starts a little faster and comes in a little smaller. Okay, what was the startup time? Who remembers? Y'all rock! You know what, y'all should have coded this. Y'all just know this stuff, really. This is good. So I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna say .build. Yep, hold on, I can do this. /build, and then go native, and then go S1 demo. Let's see if we can make this start a little faster. Oh, that's a little faster. We've got it down to 0.06 seconds. I think that's a little faster than 1.4. I wonder if it's going to use a little less memory. What was the original number? Was it 5? It's down to 65. So when it's time for you to look at maybe reducing the size of your apps, being able to get more compute resource or more apps on a compute resource, native compilation may be a solution for you. You're also going to hear some things on how we talked about restart, or when we were starting up our apps to quickly build those up. Certainly native compilation, crack, and then also some of the solutions that we're also seeing from our providers out there like the AWS. We'll see that they're providing those solutions to speed up that start time for the JVMs. This is just one of them. All right, so we're going to go back, and we are going to go back to slideshow. And Bob, I have a question for you. Ooh, sorry. Wow, that was loud. So we've talked about how we can make apps start a little faster, take a little more memory. Do you have any ideas on how we can maybe make our apps a little bit more performant? Do you have any ideas how we can do that?
Yeah, one way we can do that is to adopt reactive programming. So reactive programming is a way that you can use to leverage non-blocking I/O so that you can get more throughput out of your applications. To use use reactive programming, you want to make sure that you use it throughout the stack, and this is where Spring has you covered. So at the base, kind of at the same level as Spring Framework, we have Project Reactor. Project Reactor provides the foundational types that you'll need to implement reactive programming. And to use this effectively, it really should be throughout the entire stack, and this is where Spring has you covered as well. And so there are reactive counterparts to a lot of the Spring portfolio that you've seen. For example, we saw Spring Web. We also have Spring Reactive Web that leverages non-blocking I/O. So if that's something you're interested in, that's an architecture that you can pursue. Additionally, with Project Loom virtual threads coming up in JDK 21, you heard in the keynote, this is something that we will support in the next upcoming versions of Spring, so you can take full advantage of this as well.
Okay. How many of y'all noticed I'm long-winded? Raise your hand, be honest. Oh, look, raise it, raise it, raise it. There we go. I'm long-winded. So, Bob, can you do me a favor? Can you just maybe quickly summarize what we've covered here today?
I'll try. So I guess why Spring? You know, what is it all about? So first, I think it's important to recognize the breadth of use cases. So the number of things that we tried to cover today, Glenn and I tried to structure our talk so that you could see if you have a business problem, Spring likely has an application in the portfolio that can help. We just touched on a few, maybe of the more common ones, and the ones that we did touch on can do a lot more than we talked about. So consider Spring if you have a need that you need to solve. So not only do we cover a lot, but we're also stable. So we've said we've been around for 20 years. We're really proud of that, and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So we offer regular releases, regular support, regular open source support. But if you need more than that, we do offer commercial support through VMware Spring Runtime. We have Spring Academy. Happy to announce there's 3 new classes as of yesterday. So go there and check that out to level up. And then we also offer Spring Consulting so that you can get help from the stewards of Spring. So Spring Framework is also flexible in that we allow you to change out the technologies and the vendors around the edges and keeping the core paradigm really similar. So we saw that with data, how we support a lot of different vendors in the data space, same thing with messaging. And that's a foundational concept of Spring. So we try to abstract away a lot of those details so that when you do choose different vendors and swapping in and swapping out different components, we try to make that as seamless as possible for you. And lastly, we're growing. And so not only are we one of the larger ones, we have a lot of use cases, we're growing. So in addition to the 50% download growth that I showed earlier for the past 5 years, we're also adding new features. And so we're excited as the industry continues to grow, Spring will continue to grow with it. So I think that's it, Glenn.
Well, folks, thank you so much for coming, and we have a few minutes for questions. Please take the time to click the survey and say, Glenn can kind of talk, but when he doesn't know how to spell in his demos. So, anybody have any questions on Spring or hot topics therein? All right. Yeah, sir, go ahead.
Glenn, I talked to you earlier.
Yeah, okay, I just want to make sure we cover questions, and yes, you'll get covered. I just want to say if there's any questions, we good? All right.